Section 28 of The Red and the Black by Stendhal, translated by Horace Barnett Samuel. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 28. A Procession. All hearts were moved. The presence of God seemed to have descended into these narrow Gothic streets that stretched in every direction and were sanded by the care of the faithful. Young. It was in vain that Julien pretended to be petty and stupid. He could not please. He was too different. Yet all these professors, he said to himself, are very clever people, men in 1,000. Why do they not like my humility? Only one seemed to take advantage of his readiness to believe everything, and apparently to swallow everything. This was the Abbé Char Bernard, the director of the ceremonies of the cathedral, where for the last 15 years he had been given occasion to hope for a canonry. While waiting, he taught homiletics at the seminary. During the period of Julien's blindness, this class was one of those in which he most frequently came out top. The Abbé Char had used this as an opportunity to manifest some friendship to him, and when the class broke up, he would be glad to take him by the arm for some turns in the garden. "What is he getting at?" Julien would say to himself. He noticed with astonishment that for hours on end the abbé would talk to him about the ornaments possessed by the cathedral. It had 17 lace chasubles, besides the mourning vestments. A lot was hoped from the old wife of the Judge du Rubempré. This lady, who was 90 years of age, had kept for at least 70 years her wedding dress of superb Lyon material, embroidered with gold. "Imagine, my friend," the Abbé Char would say, stopping abruptly and staring with amazement, "that this material keeps quite stiff. There is so much gold in it. It is generally thought in Besançon that the will of the judge's wife will result in the cathedral treasure being increased by more than 10 chasubles, without counting 4 or 5 capes of the great feast." "I will go further," said the Abbé Char, lowering his voice. "I have reasons for thinking the judge's wife will leave us her magnificent silver-gilt candlesticks, supposed to have been bought in Italy by Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, whose favourite minister was one of the good lady's ancestors." "But what is the fellow getting at with all this old clothes business?" thought Julien. "These adroit preliminaries have been going on for centuries, and nothing comes of them. He must be very suspicious of me. He is cleverer than all the others, whose secret aim can be guessed so easily in a fortnight. I understand. He must have been suffering for 15 years from mortified ambition." Julien was summoned one evening in the middle of the fencing lesson to the Abbé Pirard, who said to him, "Tomorrow is the feast of Corpus Domini, the Fête Dieu. The Abbé Char Bernard needs you to help him to decorate the cathedral. Go and obey." The Abbé Pirard called him back and added sympathetically, "That depends on you whether you will utilize the occasion to go into the town." "Incedo per ignes," answered Julien. "I have secret enemies." Julien went to the cathedral next morning with downcast eyes. The sight of the streets and the activity which was beginning to prevail in the town did him good. In all quarters they were extending the fronts of the houses for the procession. All the time that he had passed in the seminary seemed to him no more than a mere moment. His thoughts were of Vergy and of the pretty Amanda, whom he might perhaps meet, for her café was not very far off. He saw in the distance the Abbé Char Bernard on the threshold of his beloved cathedral. He was a big man with a jovial face and a frank air. Today he looked triumphant. "I was expecting you, my dear son," he cried as soon as he saw Julien in the distance. "Be welcome. This day's duty will be protracted and arduous. Let us fortify ourselves by a first breakfast. We will have the second at 10 o'clock, during High Mass." "I do not wish, sir," said Julien to him gravely, "to be alone for a single instant. Deign to observe," he added, showing him the clock over their heads, "that I have arrived at 1 minute to 5. "So those little rascals at the seminary frightened you. It is very good of you to think of them," said the abbé. "But is the road less beautiful because there are thorns in the hedges which border it? Travellers go on their way and leave the wicked thorns to wait in vain where they are. And now to work, my dear friend, to work." The Abbé Char was right in saying that the task would be arduous. There had been a great funeral ceremony at the cathedral the previous day. They had not been able to make any preparations. They had consequently only one morning for dressing all the Gothic pillars which constitute the three naves with a kind of red damask cloth ascending to a height of 30 feet. The bishop had fetched by mail 4 decorators from Paris, but these gentry were not able to do everything, and far from giving any encouragement to the clumsiness of the Besançon colleagues, they made it twice as great by making fun of them. Julien saw that he would have to climb the ladder himself. His agility served him in good stead. He undertook the direction of the decorators from town. The Abbé Chas was delighted as he watched him flit from ladder to ladder. When all the pillars were dressed in damask, 5 enormous bouquets of feathers had to be placed on the green baldachin above the grand altar. A rich coping of gilded wood was supported by 8 big straight columns of Italian marble, but to reach the centre of the baldachin above the tabernacle involved walking over an old wooden cornice which was 40 feet high and possibly worm-eaten. The sight of this difficult crossing had extinguished the gaiety of the Parisian decorators, which up till then had been so brilliant. They looked at it from down below, argued a great deal, but did not go up. Julien seized hold of the bouquets of feathers and climbed the ladder at a run. He placed it neatly on the crown-shaped ornament in the centre of the baldachin. When he came down the ladder again, the Abbé Chas Bernard embraced him in his arms. "Optime!" exclaimed the good priest. "I will tell this to Monseigneur." Breakfast at 10 o'clock was very gay. The Abbé Chas had never seen his church look so beautiful. "Dear disciple," he said to Julien, "my mother used to let out chairs in this venerable building, so I have been brought up in this great edifice. The terror of Robespierre ruined us, but when I was 8 years old, that was my age then, I used to serve masses in private houses, so you see I got my meals on mass days. Nobody could fold a chasuble better than I could, and I never cut the fringes. After the re-establishment of public worship by Napoleon, I had the good fortune to direct everything in this venerable metropolis. 5 times a year do my eyes see it adorned with these fine ornaments. But it has never been so resplendent, and the damask breadths have never been so well tied or so close to the pillars as they are today." "So he is going to tell me his secret at last," said Julien. "Now he is going to talk about himself. He is expanding." But nothing imprudent was said by the man, in spite of his evident exaltation. "All the same, he has worked a great deal," said Julien to himself. "He is happy. What a man! What an example for me! He really takes the cake." This was a vulgar phrase which he had learned from the old surgeon. As the Sanctus of High Mass sounded, Julien wanted to take a surplice to follow the bishop in the superb procession. "And the thieves, my friend, and the thieves!" exclaimed the Abbé Chas. "Have you forgotten them? The procession will go out, but we will watch, will you and I? We shall be very lucky if we get off with the loss of a couple of ells of this fine lace which surrounds the base of the pillars. It is a gift of Madame de Rubempre. It comes from her great-grandfather, the famous Count. It is made of real gold, my friend," added the Abbé in a whisper, and with evident exultation, "and all genuine. I entrust you with the watching of the north wing. Do not leave it. I will keep the south wing and the great nave for myself. Keep an eye on the confessional. It is there that the women accomplices of the thieves always spy. Look out for the moment when we turn our backs." As he finished speaking, 11:45 struck. Immediately afterwards the sound of the great clock was heard. It rang a full peal. These full solemn sounds affected Julien. His imagination was no longer turned to things earthly. The perfume of the incense and of the rose leaves thrown before the Holy Sacrament by little children disguised as St. John increased his exaltation. Logically, the grave sounds of the bell should only have recalled to Julien's mind the thoughts of the labour of 20 men paid 54 centimes each, and possibly helped by 15 or 20 faithful souls. Logically, he ought to have thought of the wear and tear of the cords and of the framework, and of the danger of the clock itself, which falls down every 2 centuries, and to have considered the means of diminishing the salary of the bell-ringers, or of paying them by some indulgence or other grace dispensed from the treasure of the church without diminishing its purse. Julien's soul, exalted by these sounds with all their virile fullness, instead of making these wise reflections, wandered in the realm of imagination. He will never turn out a good priest or a good administrator. Souls which get thrilled so easily are at the best only capable of producing an artist. At this moment the presumption of Julien burst out into full view. Perhaps 50 of his comrades in the seminary, made attentive to the realities of life by their own unpopularity and the Jacobinism which they are taught to see hiding behind every hedge, would have had no other thought suggested by the great bell of the cathedral except the wages of the ringers. They would have analysed with the genius of Bahram whether the intensity of the emotion produced among the public was worth the money which was given to the ringers. If Julien had only tried to think of the material interests of the cathedral, his imagination would have transcended its actual object, and thought of economizing 40 francs on the fabric, and have lost the opportunity of avoiding an expense of 25 centimes. While the procession slowly traversed Besançon on the finest day imaginable, and stopped at the brilliant altar stations put up by the authorities, the church remained in profound silence. There prevailed a semi-obscurity, an agreeable freshness. It was still perfumed with the fragrance of flowers and incense. The silence, the deep solitude, the freshness of the long nave sweetened Julien's reverie. He did not fear being troubled by the Abbé Chas, who was engaged in another part of the building. His soul had almost abandoned its mortal tenement, which was pacing slowly the north wing which had been trusted to his surveillance. He was all the more tranquil when he had assured himself that there was no one in the confessional except some devout women. His eyes looked in front of him, seeing nothing. His reverie was almost broken by the sight of 2 well-dressed women, one in the confessional and the other on a chair quite near her. He looked without seeing, but noticed, however, either by reason of some vague appreciation of his duties or admiration for the aristocratic but simple dress of the ladies, that there was no priest in the confessional. It is singular, he thought, that if these fair ladies are devout, they are not kneeling before some altar, or that if they are in society, they have not an advantageous position in the first row of some balcony. How well cut that dress is! How graceful! He slackened his pace to try and look at them. The lady who was kneeling in the confessional turned her head a little, hearing the noise of Julien's step in this solemn place. Suddenly she gave a loud cry and felt ill. As the lady collapsed and fell backwards on her knees, her friend who was near her hastened to help her. At the same time Julien saw the shoulders of the lady who was falling backwards. His eyes were struck by a twisted necklace of fine big pearls which he knew well. What were his emotions when he recognized the hair of Madame de Renal? It was she. The lady who was trying to prevent her from falling was Madame de Ville. Julien was beside himself and hastened to their side. Madame de Renal's fall would perhaps have carried her friend along with her if Julien had not supported them. He saw the head of Madame de Renal, pale and entirely devoid of consciousness, floating on his shoulders. He helped Madame de Ville to lean that charming head up against a straw chair. He knelt down. Madame de Ville turned round and recognized him. "Away, monsieur, away," she said to him in a tone of the most lively anger. "Above all, do not let us see you again. The sight of you would be sure to horrify you. She was so happy before you came. Your conduct is atrocious. Flee, take yourself off, if you have any shame left." These words were spoken with so much authority, and Julien felt so weak, that he did take himself off. "She always hated me," he said to himself, thinking of Madame de Ville. At the same moment the nasal chanting of the first priests in the procession, which was now coming back, resounded in the church. The Abbé Chas Bernard called Julien, who at first did not hear him, several times. He came at last and took his arm behind a pillar where Julien had taken refuge, more dead than alive. He wanted to present him to the bishop. "Are you feeling well, my child?" said the abbé to him, seeing him so pale and almost incapable of walking. "You have worked too much." The abbé gave him his arm. "Come, sit down behind me here, on the little seat of the dispenser of holy water. I will hide you." They were now beside the main door. "Calm yourself. We have still a good 20 minutes before Monseigneur appears. Try and pull yourself together. I will lift you up when he passes, for in spite of my age I am strong and vigorous." Julien was trembling so violently when the bishop passed that the Abbé Chas gave up the idea of presenting him. "Do not take it too much to heart," he said. "I will find another opportunity." The same evening he had 6 pounds of candles, which had been saved, he said, by Julien's carefulness and by the promptness with which he had extinguished them, carried to the seminary chapel. Nothing could have been nearer the truth. The poor boy was extinguished himself. He had not had a single thought after meeting Madame de Renal. End of section 28.